Russia is the largest country on Earth, spanning 11 time zones and commanding over 37,000 kilometers of coastline. And yet, for 500 years, this massive empire has been suffocating. It is a superpower trapped in a frozen cage, desperately fighting to reach the sea. This isn't just a quirk of geography. It is the single most important key to understanding everything Russia has ever done, and perhaps what it will do next. But to understand why, we have to look at the map that haunts the Kremlin. Here on No Geography, we often talk about how terrain dictates strategy, but nowhere is this more brutal than in Russia. At first glance, the map suggests Russia is a maritime powerhouse. It has access to the Pacific in the east, the Arctic in the north, and the Baltic and Black Seas in the west. But zoom in closer, and you see the problem that has plagued Russian leaders since the Middle Ages. Most of this coastline is useless. For huge portions of the year, the Arctic coast is a solid block of ice, making commercial shipping impossible without expensive icebreakers. Even Vladivostok, Russia's primary gateway to the Pacific, is ice-locked for about 4 months a year and requires constant icebreaking to remain operational. Worse, Vladivostok is over 9,000 kilometers from Moscow. Moving goods from the industrial heartland to the Pacific is a logistical nightmare that makes competitive trade nearly impossible. This leaves the European side of Russia, where 75% of the population lives. Historically, the Grand Duchy of Moscow was a landlocked state, surrounded by potential enemies and cut off from the global trade routes that were making nations like Britain and the Netherlands rich. Russia was a giant, but a frozen one. To become a great power, Russia needed to breathe. It needed a warm water port, a harbor that does not freeze in winter, allowing for year-round trade and naval projection. And to get one, Russia would have to go to war. The man who decided to break Russia out of its prison was Peter the Great. In the late 17th century, he realized that without a navy and direct access to Europe, Russia would remain a medieval backwater. Peter was so obsessed with the sea that he famously traveled to the Netherlands in disguise to work in a shipyard and learn the art of shipbuilding himself. His target was the Baltic Sea. At the time, this was a Swedish lake, controlled by a powerful empire that blocked Russia's path to the west. For 21 years, Peter fought the Great Northern War, engaging in brutal campaigns to secure a tiny strip of coastline at the mouth of the Neva River. When he finally seized it, he didn't just build a fort, he built a new capital. St. Petersburg was constructed on a desolate swamp, at the cost of tens of thousands of serf lives, specifically to be Russia's window to Europe. It was a monumental achievement. Suddenly, Russia could trade directly with London and Amsterdam. But there was a catch. The Baltic is geographically constrained. To reach the Atlantic Ocean, Russian ships have to pass through the Danish Straits, narrow channels that can be easily blockaded by foreign powers. And even St. Petersburg isn't truly ice-free. It requires icebreakers in severe winters. Peter had opened a window, but he hadn't kicked down the door. Russia needed something better. It needed the south. If Peter the Great looked west, Catherine the Great looked south. Her prize was the Black Sea, and specifically, the Crimean Peninsula. Geographically, Crimea is a fortress jutting out into the middle of the sea, dominating the entire region. In 1783, Catherine annexed Crimea from the Ottoman Empire and founded the city of Sevastopol. This was the game-changer Russia had been waiting for. Sevastopol is one of the best natural harbors in the world. Crucially, it is a true warm water port. It never freezes. From here, Russia could project power not just into the Black Sea, but potentially into the Mediterranean and beyond. For the next century, Protecting this access became the prime directive of Russian foreign policy. It was the reason for the Crimean War in 1853, where Britain and France invaded specifically to destroy the Russian naval base at Sevastopol and stop Russia's southern expansion. They understood what the Tsars understood: whoever holds Crimea holds the Black Sea. But even with Crimea, Russia faced another geographic nightmare, a nightmare that exists to this day. You can have the best navy in the Black Sea, but the Black Sea is essentially a giant lake. To get out, you have to pass through one of the most critical choke points on Earth. This is the Bosphorus Strait. At its narrowest point, it is less than 700 meters wide. Along with the Dardanelles, these straits are the only exit from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean, and they are controlled entirely by Turkey. This is Russia's Turkish Bottleneck. For centuries, this geography has terrified Russian planners. If Turkey, or Turkey's allies, decide to close the straits, the entire Russian Black Sea fleet becomes useless, trapped in a bathtub. This isn't theoretical. It has happened before. Today, Turkey is a member of NATO. This means that Russia's most important warm water route passes directly through the territory of a rival military alliance. The Montreux Convention of 1936 gives Turkey legal control over warship passage. So, while Sevastopol allows Russia to float a navy, the Turkish straits determine if that navy can actually go anywhere. This anxiety creates a feeling of encirclement in Moscow. They have the port, but they don't hold the keys to the gate. And this geographic anxiety reached a breaking point in 2014. In 2014, the world watched in shock as Russian forces seized Crimea from Ukraine. Western media focused on international law, sovereignty, and ethnic tensions. But if you look at the map, the invasion wasn't just about politics. It was about survival, at least from Russia's perspective. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Crimea became part of an independent Ukraine. Russia had to lease the Sevastopol naval base from Ukraine. For 2 decades, this was manageable. But when the Euromaidan revolution toppled the pro-Russian government in Kiev, Moscow panicked. If Ukraine joined NATO or the EU, Russia faced the very real possibility of being evicted from Sevastopol. Without Sevastopol, Russia would effectively lose its ability to project power in the Black Sea, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. It would be pushed back to the ice. Putin didn't take Crimea just for national pride. He took it because, geographically, he felt he had no choice. The annexation secured the warm water port that Catherine the Great had won 2 centuries earlier. Geography dictated the timeline. But even with Crimea secured, the eternal problem remains. The straits are still Turkish, the Baltic is still narrow, the north is still frozen. So, is there any escape? Today, Russia is trying to solve this 500-year-old puzzle in new ways. In the Mediterranean, they have secured a naval facility at Tartus, Syria, a foothold beyond the Turkish straits. But the biggest change is coming not from politics, but from the planet itself. Climate change is melting the Arctic ice. For the world, this is a crisis. For Russian strategists, it is an opportunity. The Northern Sea Route could finally give Russia a coastline that functions like a real ocean front. If the ice recedes enough, goods could flow from Asia to Europe along Russia's northern border, bypassing the Suez Canal and the Turkish Straits entirely. Russia is already building a massive fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers to control this future trade artery. After 5 centuries of fighting for the South, Russia's future might actually be in the north. But until that ice melts, the geography remains a prison. We often think of history as a series of choices made by powerful people. But in Russia's case, the choices were made for them by the ice, the straits, and the sheer distance of their land. Every czar, every premier, and every president has faced the same geographic truth. Russia borders 3 oceans, but the sea remains just out of reach. It is a superpower constantly pushing against its own walls, driven by a geographic anxiety that has shaped the world map for centuries. And as long as the ports freeze, that push will never stop. Geography shapes history more than we realize. If you want to understand how the land beneath our feet determines the fate of nations, make sure you're subscribed to Know Geography.